Hello, and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co host, Cameron McAllister. In this episode, we talk about how we as Christians, that's right, we as Christians struggle with truth. Ours is an age that prioritizes personal preference over the truth, and the church is certainly not immune. So we talk about that today. This will be helpful to you because this is something that affects all of us in often subtle and insidious ways. If you like what we do, like, share, and subscribe. Tell people about it. Spread the word. And if you want to support us and get behind what we're doing, you can do that by going to www.toltogether.com.
And today, Cameron, I want to talk about truthy truth, real truth, not fake truth. Um, and ponder the question: Have
Alternative
Christians
facts.
alternative facts, alternative history? Just do your own research, um, or watch a 4-minute YouTube video and become an expert. No, the question is: Have Christians given up on truth? And this is
Mm.
a historically, I mean, there's so many sociologists and cultural critics and theologians and stuff who are saying there's a sense in which there's a pragmatic embrace of Christianity, but we give um, Hinduism a hard time, maybe, or more Eastern thought, who has this constellations of gods and goddesses, and then they say, why can't we just add Jesus into this mix as another god? So we attach him into our already existing belief system, and onward we go. And we can look at that and be hypercritical of it, as we rightly should be. Of like Jesus is not just a bumper sticker that goes onto you don't add him into the mix of your other gods and goddesses and deities, but there is a secular Christian quasi connection here that I see happening that the New Testament actually warns about having nothing to do with worthless genealogies and old wives' tales, but to think about what it means for something to be true. And I mention this only because I think years ago we did one on the idea of like, if you're a Christian and you say you believe that Jesus rose from the dead and he's the Son of God, and you believe that's true, and you also believe a whole bunch of other conspiracy theories that we won't mention here, does that hurt your credibility when you say, like, I think the New Testament is, or like the Gospels are eyewitnesses? Like, by
Mm.
what metric did you come to that conclusion that that is true? Because if you're believing ridiculous stuff and you say that is true, and you're believing things that I think are true, but you're saying they're true for the same reason, you can believe the right thing for the wrong reason, or you can think that something is true for an illegitimate reason. Now, I'm so happy you arrive at some of these things, but I've been in conversations in my running around and traveling, and you're listening into what people are talking about in gas stations and stores and whatnot, or even college settings, where I'm like, I, as the Orthodox conservative Christian here, am the most skeptical and the most cynical one in this group. And whether it's from extraterrestrials to weird dietary things to uh, vaccines to like you just fill in the and there and half of conspiracy theories turn out to be true. I acknowledge that too. And the government's up to shady stuff for sure. But on the other hand, it's this: I believe in Christ and I believe just about anything else I've seen a YouTube video about that really unsettles me, I think. No, I don't think it unsettles me. And so I would like to see. First of all, I'd like to hear whether or not this is just me, and I'm becoming paranoid in my 30s of like the flippancy with truth. So, A, if you've seen that, and then kind of just do a simple walk back through, Cameron, on what we mean as Christians when we say something is true. So that's what I'd where I'd like this to go.
It's not just you. I wish I could say it was. It's a feature, not a bug, of our age, I think, too. This is a practical outworking of what it means to live in a day where personal preference trumps any kind of or is probably the highest form of authority for many people. And so I remember talking with Oz Guinness about this many times when talking about how personal preference for many becomes the kind of deciding factor on what they're going to believe and what they are going to think. But then add to that the fact that you have at your disposal now all sorts of alternative quote facts that you can grab. I mean, it's almost as though it's not all it's no, there's no almost here. You can customize your vision of reality these days.
Sure.
And you can I mean, so we talk often about this, but I want to belabor this point just for a second because it just it shapes the way we live. So many
Oh,
perceptive
but hey, hang
thinkers
on.
on
It's
technology.
not like I can't point my fingers over there. You do this. I do this. Everybody listening to this does this. And if you don't do it, your algorithms do it for you. So nobody
Yes, I'm
gets away
saying
from this
we here.
conversation without dirty hands.
That's right. Yeah, no, this is us. This is an us problem. It's
And
a US
actually,
problem.
even
No, I'm
if
just
you're
kidding.
not technologically involved, like the Amish have this issue. I mean,
Mhm.
it's a human feature, not anyway. I interrupted you. Sorry.
It's tied to human. Yeah. No, yeah, it's definitely tied to human nature. I mean, simple willfulness, self-assertion, wanting your own way, selfishness in its basic instantiations. But what we have now are some pretty sophisticated tools for kind of feeding that monster. I think there are a couple of when you think about some of the big questions of our age, what is the good life? I think is a huge one. What does it mean to be human? Another one is what is real?
Yeah.
That's coming more and more. That's been for a while, but it's coming more and more, especially with yeah, I mean, deep fake footage, all sorts of. I mean, I don't want to. I'm boring myself just repeating all of these details that we're already aware of. But here's the thing: if you have technologies that shape the way we think and the way we live, this is perceptive people have been saying this for a while. I think of Marshall McLuhan; he was big on this, but think about the fact that you have so many devices now where you set them up for, to basically lock into all your personal preferences. And then of course, yeah, you mentioned the A word, algorithms. It's you coming to a place now where that will of course will condition you to let personal preference take the lead. Now, you can resist it, of course you can, but this is why the we language is important. This is all of us. Nathan's right, because you can resist that, of course, and you can be more intentional about it. But that's the thing. You now have to be more intentional about it. You have to
Okay.
think about it.
Here.
Because if you don't,
We
you will drift into these basic habits of mind.
there's another element and feature at play on top of everything that you said, which is true. And not to go too far down this, but I really don't like telling people that I disagree with them. Is another feature of that.
Mm,
And so the
sure.
degree to which you are sitting on a train or a plane and somebody's talking about like how they're going to invest their money based on their astrological sign,
Mm,
um,
sure.
like to what degree do we get involved when other people are just saying stuff that we think is totally nuts? Um, that is a feature that I feel is a maybe a cultural development, maybe it's a personality quirk, um, but that's in there too of like we don't want to contradict each other ever, or call each other out, and so I think that leads to a culture of or you just cut that person out of your life if they do disagree with you, but that can kind of lead to a vicious cycle of your own validity bubble.
Well, it leads to some interesting tension. So, when it comes to somebody saying, "Hey, here's how I wanna invest my money," or "I like transcendental meditation practices, it's really helped me a lot." Some of these pursuits are relatively innocuous in the sense that they're not going to have it's not gonna have a direct impact on you necessarily if you're talking to a stranger on a plane, but so in those instances, I think the cultural temptation is, "Well, I don't agree, but you know what? Obviously, this does something for this person. Transcendental meditation has clearly helped them. So, or you know, astrology clearly gives them some meaning in their lives. So, who am I to sit here and contradict that? This I don't want to take away from their sense of satisfaction, happiness here. So that's the soft side of it. But then you get into matters of politics or religion or those areas of deep difference where a person's decisions affect the common good. Okay, so now suddenly the stakes are higher because lives are going to be affected, and then that's when you have okay, this really matters. Let's tell the truth here. Let's have it out with the facts, and then that's where you run into the interesting experience of everybody having their own set of customized facts that they'll bring out and they'll marshal and their own statistics and their now Are Nathan and I saying that we don't have access to true reality? No, no, we're not saying that. We're trying to. I think a lot of what we try to do, Nathan, is what sociologists do. I think Peter Berger once said, "I my job is reading other people's mail." So looking at how people actually live on the
which is
ground.
illegal, by the way.
So that's
But anyway,
which is illegal, by the way. So you be careful with that. Okay, he was a
metaphorically
very
speaking,
intrepid sociologist. Yes, metaphorically, but we metaphorically want to read other people's mail because just or Karl Barth's got a great phrase that ministers of the gospel. He was thinking of pastors should have the Bible in the one hand and the newspaper in the other. Understand how and Karl Barth was for years and years just a pastor of a small church. So when you're dealing with the outworkings of all of this in people's daily lives, when you're in these conversations, this is often what happens. If it's something that's relatively innocuous with somebody, oh, the temptation is I don't want to step on their toes because this is clearly something that they enjoy and they like and it gives them a sense of meaning. I don't want to take that away from them. But then when you get into matters of politics, that's an easy place to point. Suddenly, that's when I think people often go to anger very quickly because we're not used to having those kinds of serious disagreements and conversations where we're describing what we take to be a shared world and a sort of common experience. Maybe that's it, Nathan. Increasingly, we don't have the sense that we have a shared world or a
okay,
shared
yes,
experience.
all right. So this is a good segue. So the shared, and this is my my critique of like psilocybin and hallucination is you can get a deep experience, but it's not a shared experience. I don't think we actually are seeking experiences. I think we're seeking shared experience. And actually, Chesterton speaks to this a good bit. I think, and also Lewis, when talking about beauty, is we want to participate in it with others. We want to share. That is part of the that component of it. Okay, but let's back up a second, and I'm going to say here's how I look at it. Here's where the culture doesn't care how I look at it, and then we're going to come back to why I think the way that we look at it as Christians will be the way forward in the future. So, kind of the threefold test of truth historically has been internal coherence. So think of the C there, coherence. Does the story make sense internally? And this is largely what's happening in a trial scene, a court scene. Somebody gives their version of the details, somebody else gives their version of the details, and they're looking for witnesses to say, yeah, do the pieces of this thing fit together? Um, is it a congruent? Are there contradictions within it? If so, it's not coherent. Um, that's the way this works. And there are funny examples. If I say to you, I have a friend named Bill, he's a bachelor and his wife's name is Susan. You're gonna say, wait a second, that doesn't internally make like that's not the way that that works. There's an internal contradiction to the way that you're looking at the words and the facts there. It doesn't make sense inside itself. Um, so coherence is a must. It has to make sense. The trick is that there are a lot of things that make sense that are coherent that still aren't true. Like Middle Earth is pretty internally coherent. Whole mythology, stories, distances, people, places, names, the whole thing. A couple plot gaps, but by and large, it's a coherent world. But we don't think that it's true because it lacks the second C, which is correspondence. So, does this coherent story correspond to reality? Is there a testable, measurable way in which we can other people have access to it to go look and figure it out and decide whether or not it's actually true. Like, and this is the old German philosophy science of verificationalism, falsification. Like, if it is, and they went too far by saying that if you have a claim but it can't be verified or falsified, it's certainly not true. But there is a degree of that is real. For something to be true,
Hmm.
if I say there's a polar bear under your bed, Cameron, and you go and look and there isn't a polar bear under your bed, like it doesn't correspond to reality in any meaningful way. So therefore, we don't believe it's true. And there is a a deep, a weirder version of this where you believe that something, if it corresponds to my reality, it doesn't matter if it coheres. So only our primary, I think it's Xenoticism, actually. It's like, well, the earth looks flat, therefore it is. Where it's a total, like my central perception and my visual perception alone determines what's real. And so we don't want to slip into that hyper individualized category of truth on one hand as Christians, nor do we want to go to it doesn't have to have internal coherence in order for it to be true. We want both of those to work together harmoniously in order to say, no, there are actual things here that we can discern. Where it gets tricky for us is the categories where we don't have the tools or the resources to decide whether or not something actually corresponds or coheres. And we have to trust experts or we have to send journalists to go figure it out of so is there a famine in Gaza or is there not? Um, are mercury-based preservatives in vaccines harmful or are they not? Are um, do electrons even exist? Like, I'm just asking questions. And so there's just such a proliferation of an inability to trust voices and to always find contradicting voices. Are seed oils good for you or are they not? I mean, we could go from I mean, everybody could build a 15-part list here where we have no real primary or communal ability to fact check anything in real time. And we're left to the whims and the mercies of the people, and often mediated through a screen telling us what's real or not. And so those are two, the coherence and the correspondence, that are necessary. But then there's one more there, which is the livability of it, which is, does any of this make a difference in the first place? Um, my favorite example of this is that there's an ice body orbiting around Saturn called Titan, and the gravity is so low and the density is so high, the atmospheric density is so high that if you were there and you had a hang glider and flippers, you could fly under human power. Which, I mean, that'd be awesome, except it's super, super cold there and you'd die almost immediately. But if you leave out that variable, that's a technically true thing that
Mhm.
doesn't change the way you live your life at all. And so correspondence, coherence, livability for me are very, very important features of, like, okay, so if that is true, what do we do with it? Or what meaningful distinction does it make? And I would say that as a Christian, Christianity has all three of those things in spades. I am the way, the truth, and the life almost fits into that metric perfectly. And so when Jesus claims that he is the truth and no one else is the truth, there's a harmonious fulfillment of story, interaction with reality, and then life transformation and livability that I find uniquely there, that I haven't been able to parse out or find in anything else. And so if I'm saying that I believe these things are true as a Christian for these reasons, and then I start believing things that don't use that same framework of truth, that's where I'm like, what are we doing here?
Mhm. Yeah, there's a for a long, long time, and the first real vivid expression of it is in Plato's Myth of the Cave. We have been thinking about how we are prone to preferring illusions to reality. And this is so that's a perennial feature of human nature. And you recognize that earnest seekers of truth are relatively rare. People
Well,
who are willing to
yeah, but that's the
commit
thing
their
that
lives
bothers.
to the truth and follow it wherever it leads. Yeah.
But so this is the thing, the secular version of that is chaotic, of what happens when you live in a culture where internal coherence isn't necessary, where it's like, I believe, and this gets into like, well, I believe in an extreme atheistic naturalism as an explanation for the origin of
Mhm.
life. Okay, tell me how you want to build a morality out of that. You don't have a coherent, corresponding way to
Yes.
do, like, there isn't, and people are like, whatever, this works. Like, nobody really cares outside of kind of a deep theistic framework, whether or not they have internal consistency or coherence. Like, but I see it in my, like, I can talk about how, like, processed sugar is bad for me while eating a handful of chocolate chips. So that is the real experience. But at a certain point, it's going to run out of steam and you're going to need bedrock under your bridge before you move on at some point.
Well, talking about the running out of steam is important. Yes, because for many, I think just that the indifference that you mentioned, which is another major problem in, I think, just just our day-to-day lives in the modern world, just that casual indifference. Well, who cares about how you ground morality, or, why would we bother ourselves with any of these big questions? Richard Rorty, I think, had a very haunting way of putting it. He said, when some theologian or metaphysician tries to talk to you about morality, or the nature of reality, let's just change the subject. That what a amazingly blithe dismissal. Also, just he was just such a great writer, but that works until you come to a place where the flower is starting to wither, as Os Guinness would say, when we're a cut flower society. And that's we're learning the hard lesson now in the realm of politics, but just the basic disintegration that's happening now, our cultural breakdown that's happening in Western Europe and here in the United States, we're recognizing that Christian heritage was very important actually to the functioning of our society, you know. And as much as I'm not a fan of the whole, hey, let's just make a pragmatic civilizational argument for Christianity. What I'm just trying to do is illustrate it's possible that that kind of indifference is a luxury, but
Okay.
eventually you can come to a place where you no longer have the luxury, where you really are in crisis, where morality has taken such a backseat for such a long time that eventually you come to a place of real disorder. And then suddenly it matters. And then we start to ask those hard, important, ancient questions again, which is where we're at right now. We're as a culture, we're asking ancient questions again with
Yeah.
very serious tones. It's not like the 1990s where it's just all irony.
Well, here's a actually to pick up on the flower metaphor, and I wonder if this isn't where we're headed with this. So Oz has been using that image of, so you harvest some flowers, you stick them in a jar of water, and they hold their beauty for a certain amount of time, but they've been disconnected from the roots, and so they're eventually going to wither. But there's this time that you live in which it looks like they're alive, even though they're disconnected from their roots. I think the flower has withered there, but to use the next phase of the flower imagery, there was a plant growing in our garden this spring. And I was like, oh, that's kind of a goofy looking plant. That's kind of neat. Like, we're not going to pull that weed out. We're going to let it grow. And we kept watching. We're like, oh, I wonder what this could be. And we didn't look it up. We were just kind of waiting to see what it turned into. And then a friend from church was visiting us and walking through our garden. They're like, why do you have that growing there? I was like, I don't even know what it is. And she's like, I'll tell you exactly what it is. And it will seriously mess you and your children up, if not kill you, if you ingest any part of it. And I was like, oh, and so I looked it up, and yeah, there's a long history here, even to the early explorers of the Appalachian region tell stories about what happened when men accidentally mixed some of this in with their tea or their stew or something.
Wow.
I'm like, you know what? We don't need this in our garden. Like, we just didn't know what it was. Um, and so I wonder if the cut flowers have withered, and the question is what's growing back in its place eventually going to kill you and your children? That seems to me to be a little bit more of the pressing issue here of, like, we've lost the plot
Mhm.
of the ability to identify what's actually beneficial, and in light of that fading away, things that are actually very,
What's here now?
what's here now?
What's growing now? Yeah. So, what's haunting about your question, though, these days, Nathan, is you opened this by applying it not to you weren't talking about the wider culture, you weren't talking about secularism, whatever that is. You're you're talking about Christians.
Number 1, 2, or 3.
You're, you're right. Yes, exactly. You're talking about yeah, James. Wow. Yeah. So we've got some Charles Taylor jokes in here. That's next level nerdery right there. So but you're talking about Christians. How this is not a those outside the church are really struggling with the truth. You're talking about us.
Okay, can I tell
So
you
how
why?
do we yeah. Yes, that's what
So,
I was gonna ask you. Why us?
why us? So, I woke up thinking about this yesterday morning. I'm, like, 10 years into preaching my way through Matthew. And I started in
They're pretty
chapter 8, looped
thorough.
around to end with the Sermon on the Mount, and I'm
Mhm.
just, like, pressing into some of the things that Jesus actually said and thinking, "Hurrah, hurrah, we all love to say we believe in Jesus, when believing in Jesus makes us feel good. It's about what God does for us. God saves me. God makes my life better." All true. That's great. However, what then do you do when you run into the things to say, "Actually, to say that I believe Jesus is to follow his way even when it's difficult, or even when it goes against my natural impulses, or even when it goes against what's politically expedient, or even when it goes against what's culturally convenient, or even when it just goes against the way that I don't feel like doing it." Do I have the same level of I have decided to follow Jesus when he asked me to be careful with the words that I speak, or to suffer in certain situations, or not to murder, much less not to hate, or and
Mm.
so if we live in a culture that is flippant with the truth, and the standard for deciding whether or not something is true is how does it make me feel, and does this make my life feel better? Will it make me more comfortable, and will it make me more secure? And that becomes the litmus test for truth. Anytime that a faith based on that comes under pressure, it's going to be rejected, because if you read what Jesus actually taught and what has been the normalized experience of the entirety of the church for the last almost 2,000 years now, it just doesn't fit. And so there has to be a standard by which we discern whether or not something is true that goes beyond our personal feelings about it. And that's where I see this as a in-house Christian conversation for being able to actually discern whether or not something is real. Are you willing to die
So
for it?
is your lead
Are you willing to suffer for it?
yes, are you willing to suffer and die for is your allegiance to Jesus or is it to personal preference? And that's not
Exactly.
some trite soundbite. That means look at we can all answer that and, "Oh, of course it's to Jesus." There's a guy named Daniel Taylor, taught at Bethel Bible College for years, was an English professor, and then retired a little bit early to just devote himself entirely to writing, but he had a haunting paragraph I came across the other day, actually. He talked about and this will push some of you who are a little bit more who've run in apologetic circles or, who appreciate the life of the mind or who are academic minded. He said, if you're a normal person, if you're a typical Christian, you probably can't give great reasons for why you believe in God, or you certainly don't have sophisticated arguments at your disposal immediately that you could just rattle off. That would just rattle off the tongue. He says that's okay. That's not a problem. You can't give really great reasons for why you follow Jesus. That's really okay. I wouldn't be worried about that. Now you can make of that what you will. But then he says, however, I would be worried if there's a huge discrepancy between what you say you believe and your life.
Mhm.
I think he's right. At now, I think a younger Cameron would have said, "Yeah, you should have those arguments, and it should be true." And hey, I'm making fun of myself, not you, so just don't worry. But now I think there is deep wisdom there, and I think we're at a cultural moment where people are much more interested in who you are than what you say you believe
But
initially. Now they'll be
do we have
interested
the
in what,
introspective
yeah.
capacity to recognize whether or not what we say we believe and what we are actually doing has a discontinuity?
So I like Stanley Hauerwas's "The recognition that you're a sinner is a theological achievement." I think that you could actually just say that more simply just by saying the Holy Spirit reveals it to you and convicts you. We need to be praying for that conviction, I think, because yes,
Mhm.
spiritual introspection is a miracle, and no, I don't think it's something that we come to on our own. So the big example I always give there, Nathan, is Solzhenitsyn in a
Mhm.
Siberian labor camp of all places, coming to the conviction, if I were to trade places with the guards, I'd probably be doing the same thing they're doing. I mean, that that's miraculous spiritual insight that can come to a human person. Because just just human nature being what it is. If you're in that position, you're the victim of these wicked, evil people who are destroying lives all around you and torturing you, and you're suffering. You're a victim, and you see them as total villains. You would never, you wouldn't. That kind of monumental, imaginative movement is inspired. So we all need that. So I mean, we need to be praying for now that conviction's painful. That also that's counter conviction is countercultural, Nathan. You've said it so well. We all want to feel good all the time. And we're conditioned to think you should feel good all the time. And if you don't feel good, then you need to either get away from the people who are making you feel bad, find a counselor who will say nice things to you, find some way to medicate this out of you. Now I'm not trying to run roughshod over some real serious, kind of mental complications that can come about. But I am saying that we're really conditioned to resist conviction these days.
Mhm.
So we need to pray for it because the experience of a Christian, the perennial experience is you follow Jesus and his command to you is if you want to follow me, you take up your cross and follow me, and that this world is not our home. and all things are not have not yet been made new. So we're going to experience brokenness and suffer, and we're going to suffer in various ways. And also, if we follow Jesus, we're really going to suffer. I mean, one last story. This is my dad when he first became a Christian, and he was they were smuggling Bibles into communist nations in the late 70s, and they were on a trip to Poland, and they had a very, very short visa. So I mean, they had, I think, 10 hours or something. You got to get, and they had thousands of New Testaments. So they had to get all of these things delivered. Everything went wrong on this trip. Absolutely everything. Their contact didn't show. They were then their van at the last minute gets stuck in this kind of swampy, muddy region, and he said, "I think every mosquito in Poland was in that van." So they're nothing's working. Dad's out there trying to physically push this van and get it out of the mud. They're being eaten alive. Their visa is about to run out. They have all of their New Testaments. None of it has been distributed. Everything's failed. So when Dad was telling me this, I said, "Well, were you?" And Dad had to lead the devotion that morning about how thankful he was. And he said, "Here's how I felt. Thankful for what? You're hurting us. You're destroying us. Everything we're doing is, and I'm on your team, for heaven's sakes. I'm I'm on team Jesus. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. What on earth?" And it didn't work out. You know, they were able to get the van out of Poland and all of that. But what did change was internally my dad's attitude changed, and he came he came to recognize that even in spite of these foibles, these failures, things not going, the discomfort, the suffering, Christ was king and is king, and all was well. And not, I mean, just because everything doesn't work out on earth, it often won't. This is a fallen world, but internally, he he had that heavenly eternal perspective again. And I like that story because so many of the, if you hear inspirational Christian stories, they'll always end with, "But in the end, of course, it worked out." But it was really hard for a while. But this one, no, it didn't. But the Lord is good. And so I think that's important to, yeah, have that
Well,
perspective.
that's a great story to end on, and we'll just leave it there, I think, with that sense of recognition that when we look at the biblical story, dying in a horrendous way can be the will of God. We see that exemplified in the life of Christ, and then countless others ever after that. And so our litmus test for truth cannot be, how does it make me feel? What does my mom think? What did this person on YouTube say? Those are fleeting, those are silly. It has to be, what is the will of God here? And if it is for me to suffer, how do I pray for wisdom and not my will, but thine be done is a magnificent and terrifying prayer. And that only works if you believe that there is a God who is good, that is true, and that you're really in touch with the truthy truth true of Jesus saying, I am the truth, and my ways are the best ways to accomplish what I want to have done in this world. That's where true faith comes into this of I'm willing to, whatever the cost, do things Christ way and let the cards fall from there because God's in control of how this pans out. So that's the level of truth that we want to engage in. And when we do so, there will be that consistency and continuity between what we say we believe and what we actually do. Jesus, when he was talking to his disciples, said that he would send the Holy Spirit and that the first thing the Spirit would do would be to convict the world and men of sin. And so, maybe as we bring this to a close, if you want to take a couple minutes of silence after this and just ask the Lord to highlight for you and convict you of places where there's inconsistencies between what you say you believe and how you're actually feeling and living and thinking and behaving. It'd be a good little spiritual exercise. Let's take a couple minutes here and lean into the Lord shaping and pruning and crafting us into what He wants in our lives, and do that with all sincerity. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.